It is the feast of the dedication of the Basilica of St. John Lateran, and it replaces the Mass of the 32nd Sunday of the year. It's curious. Why is this building so important? And for that matter, how many of you even know what it looks like? Curious. And how does one preach on a building? When one thinks of the Catholic Church, it's Michelangelo's St. Peter's that comes to mind. Even the name is curious. There's no saint named John Lateran. In 313, the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, and this was the first church built by Constantine, dedicated in 324. It is the oldest public church in Rome. It had a number of names throughout history and finally took the name St. John Lateran Basilica because it was built on land donated by the Laterani family and was served by a nearby monastery of St. John the Baptist and St. John the Divine. It remained the center of the papacy for over 1,000 years, and it still remains the Cathedral of Rome. An inscription on the facade proclaims it seat of the Pope and the mother and head of all the churches in the city and the world. And that says it all. It's a physical sign of the church's continuity, community, and connection throughout the centuries. But that doesn't explain the choice of today's curious gospel. I could be here for a couple hours if I dealt into all the richness of this gospel, but I'll be brief. Why this choice? Given the Basilica's history as the Pope's cathedral and Rome's preeminence, one would have expected a different gospel. Perhaps from Matthew's, where Christ says, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Instead, we got John's account of the cleansing of the temple. He portrays Jesus as replacing all the major Jewish feasts. He is the new temple. One of the things we don't have time for is the fact that here at the beginning of John's gospel, we have Jesus telling his disciple about his death and resurrection. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they put that historically at the end of their gospel. But here are a couple of other further curious moments in today's gospel that should cause us to reflect. Did you notice that the priests and the guards did not rush to arrest Jesus after the mayhem he had created? They recognized the action as potentially prophetic. They were rightly afraid. What if God sent him, Jesus, as a prophet? Then they would be fighting God. And that's the question we should be asking ourselves when we're disturbed in civic and religious world by possible pesky prophets. We should always be unafraid to listen and to question. Throughout the church's history, God has raised up saints called to put God and neighbor at the center of our hearts. And we often are too quick to dismiss would-be prophets. We should be asking instead what might be true in their challenge. And my last curious point, why did Jesus get so angry? The merchants were supplying a necessary service. It's certainly better to buy an animal for sacrifice locally than bring it from afar. And further, you did not want to deposit coins bearing pagan images. The merchants were supplying a necessary service. But this was done at the Mount of Olives, that is, until the high priest, Caiaphas, for personal advantage and control, allowed them into the temple precinct. Jesus' dramatic cleansing of the temple was, in part, a condemnation of Caiaphas' innovation, highlighting how commerce, not just profiteering, but commodification of worship, corrupted its sanctity and excluded sincere devotion, especially among non-Jews and the poor. And that's the point. Do we make space and time for God to dwell in us and with us? It's so easy to clutter our lives with distractions that we leave little room for God who dwells in our hearts. And today, we don't merely celebrate the continuity and connection that makes the Catholic Church one throughout the ages, but we also challenge ourselves and our community to keep the divine presence and our service to others at the center of our hearts. Be the dwelling of Jesus, be his dynamic blessing in the world. And now, as a sign of our unity as Catholics, let us stand and profess our faith. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages,